As the New Year's Eve countdown began, my home was a pressure cooker of fake cheer and simmering resentment. Tonight, my mother-in-law Brenda would finally get the one gift she truly deserved. The scent of pine needles and cheap champagne hung thick in the air, a cloying combination that was starting to make my stomach turn. Everywhere I looked, our home was filled with glitter, noise, and people I barely knew. My husband Mark was circulating, a perfect host with a plastic smile plastered on his face, pretending like our world wasn't a pressure cooker about to explode. But I could feel the heat. I could feel it in the crisp edges of the envelope tucked into the sleeve of my dress, the paper cool and sharp against my skin. It was the only thing grounding me in the dizzying chaos of the New Year's Eve party my mother-in-law, Brenda, had insisted on throwing in my house. When Brenda first moved in with us 6 months ago, it was supposed to be temporary. Her husband, Mark's dad, had passed away the year prior, and the big empty house was too much for a poor widow to handle. She sold it, made a tidy profit, and was supposed to find a nice little condo. We offered her our guest room for a month, maybe 2, just until she got back on her feet. Mark, bless his heart, thought it was the least we could do. "She's my mom, Sarah," he'd said, his eyes pleading. "She's all alone." The first month was deceptively perfect. Brenda was the model houseguest. She cooked, she cleaned, she complimented my decor. She'd call me the daughter she never had. It was all so sweet, so saccharine, that I should have known it was poison. The cracks started to show in small ways. My spice rack was rearranged alphabetically, a system that made no sense to how I actually cooked. My laundry would be helpfully done, but always with too much bleach, leaving faint white spots on my dark clothes. She'd tidy up my home office, and suddenly I couldn't find important documents for days. Each time I brought it up, she'd burst into tears. "I was only trying to help," she'd wail, and Mark would rush to her side, shooting me a look that said, "Can't you just be nice to my grieving mother?" Then the financial bleed began. It started with her adding a few little things to my grocery cart, which turned into an entire separate cart full of expensive organic snacks and imported cheeses she alone would eat. Then she started having packages delivered, boutique clothing and high-end cosmetics, all on a credit card I later discovered she'd opened using our address, with the bills conveniently disappearing before I could see them. When I confronted Mark, he'd sigh and say, "She's just trying to feel good about herself again, honey. I'll talk to her." But his talks were gentle suggestions that Brenda twisted into evidence of my cruelty. "Sarah thinks I'm a burden," she'd sob to Mark over the phone, loud enough for me to hear from the next room. "She hates having your poor old mother here." The war was quiet, fought in passive-aggressive comments and weaponized tears. She systematically positioned herself as the victim and me as the cold, heartless daughter-in-law. Our friends, the very people now drinking my wine and eating the appetizers I'd spent all day making, would pull Mark aside and tell him how wonderful his mother was, how lucky we were to have her. They didn't see her unplugging my laptop charger to plug in her heated foot bath. They didn't hear her telling Mark that my new promotion was probably just because my boss felt sorry for me. They didn't know that she was a black hole of need and entitlement, slowly sucking the light and life out of our home and our marriage. The final, unforgivable straw came 3 weeks ago. My grandmother had left me a sapphire necklace. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was the single most valuable thing I owned, both financially and sentimentally. I kept it in a velvet box in my jewelry case, taking it out only for special occasions. When I went to get it for a company holiday party, the box was empty. I tore our bedroom apart, a frantic cold dread coiling in my gut. I knew. I just knew. When I confronted Brenda, she played dumb, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "A necklace, dear? Oh, how dreadful. You must have misplaced it." But I saw the flicker, the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth. I went into her room while she was out and found the pawn shop ticket tucked inside her well-worn Bible. She had pawned my grandmother's legacy for $3,000. The receipt showed that the money had been spent on a new designer handbag and a spa weekend with her gossiping friends. That night, I showed the ticket to Mark. For the first time, he saw the monster behind the matronly mask. He was white-faced, speechless. He confronted her, and the tears and denials came, but the evidence was undeniable. Finally, she broke. "You two have so much," she shrieked, her face contorted in a mask of pure resentment. "That necklace was just sitting in a box. I needed to feel like a person again, not just some old woman living on her children's charity." Mark wanted to handle it as a family. He wanted therapy, discussions, repayment plans. He wanted to smooth things over, to put the lid back on the box and pretend the snake wasn't inside. But I was done. Something inside me had snapped, breaking clean in two. While he was trying to broker a peace treaty, I was on the phone with a lawyer. I found out our rights. As she was a tenant at will with no lease, we could serve her a 30-day notice to quit. It was legal. It was final. I filled out the paperwork myself, my hand steady for the first time in months. The lawyer advised serving it officially, but I had a different plan. She had spent 6 months humiliating me in subtle, private ways. I decided her exit would be anything but. Which brought us to tonight, 10 seconds to midnight. The party she'd orchestrated was reaching its fever pitch. Mark was trying to catch my eye from across the room, a desperate, pleading look on his face. He knew what I was planning. He had begged me not to wait until the morning to be the bigger person. But the bigger person had left the building the day I found that pawn ticket. Brenda was in the center of the living room, a champagne flute in her hand, beaming like a benevolent queen. She had my husband's friends fawning over her, telling her she was the life of the party. The crowd started the countdown, their voices a unified roar. 10, 9, 8. I pulled the envelope from my sleeve. It felt heavy, like a stone. 7, 6, 5. I started moving toward her, a clear path opening before me as if the sea itself were parting. People saw the look on my face and fell silent, their own smiles faltering. 4, 3. I was standing directly in front of her now, blocking her view of Mark, of her adoring fans, of the clock on the wall. Her regal smile finally cracked, replaced by a flicker of confusion and fear. 2, 1. The room exploded in cheers of Happy New Year, confetti popped, and noisemakers blared. In that single moment of joyous chaos, I leaned in close, my voice a low, steady whisper that cut through the noise. "Happy New Year, Brenda." I pushed the crisp white envelope into her hand, my fingers brushing against hers. "Here's your gift." Her fingers, adorned with gaudy rings she'd bought with Mark's money, closed around the paper. For a beat, she just stared at me, a confused, almost pitying smile on her face, as if I'd committed some terrible social faux pas. The noise of the party swirled around our little bubble of silence. "Oh, Sarah, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You shouldn't have. A lovely card, I'm sure." She was playing to her audience, framing me as the earnest but slightly clueless daughter-in-law. She held up the envelope for a few of her friends to see, a theatrical little flourish. "Isn't she sweet?" I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my expression as unyielding as granite, and watched. My silence was more unnerving to her than any shouting match could have been. The cogs were turning behind her eyes. This wasn't right. This wasn't part of her script. Her smile tightened. With a little self-conscious laugh, she slipped a perfectly manicured nail under the flap. The sound of tearing paper seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. People were turning to watch, their champagne flutes paused halfway to their lips. They could smell blood in the water. She slid the folded document out. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, the bold, official-looking font at the top. I watched the color drain from her expertly made-up face. It was a fascinating, horrifying thing to witness. The mask of the charming, witty matriarch didn't just slip, it shattered, falling away to reveal the raw, ugly truth of the woman beneath. Her mouth fell open, a perfect O of disbelief. Her hand began to tremble, the paper rattling softly. She read it again, then a third time, as if the words would change if she just stared at them hard enough. "Notice to quit," it said. "Legal, binding, final. What is this?" she finally whispered, her voice a dry rasp. All the theatricality was gone. This was for me, and me alone. "It's exactly what it looks like," I replied, my own voice even and low. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises. It's a legal eviction notice, Brenda. Consider yourself served." The whisper caught and then erupted into a full-blown shriek. "Eviction!" The word ripped through the party atmosphere, silencing the last of the background chatter. Every single eye was on us. "You're evicting me!" She turned, her face a mask of outrage, looking for her son. Mark! Mark! Did you know about this? Your wife is throwing your grieving mother out onto the street." This was the moment of truth. Every fight, every argument, every tearful manipulation of the last 6 months had led to this. I saw Mark weaving his way through the frozen crowd, his face pale and grim. Brenda's eyes lit up with hope. Her protector was coming. He would fix this. He would put his ungrateful wife back in her place and comfort his poor, victimized mother. She practically threw herself at him, clutching his arm. "Mark, honey, tell me this is some kind of sick joke. Tell me your wife has lost her mind." Mark gently detached her hand from his arm. He looked past her, his gaze meeting mine. In his eyes I saw exhaustion and regret, but also a flicker of the man I had married, a man of integrity. He turned back to his mother, and his voice was quiet but carried in the dead silence of the room. "It's not a joke, Mom." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Brenda looked as if he'd slapped her. "We can't do this anymore," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "This is our home. Sarah is my wife. The stealing, the lies, it has to stop. I'm sorry it came to this, but you were given a choice. You chose the handbag." The mention of the handbag, the physical proof of her betrayal, sent a fresh wave of fury through her. Her face twisted into a snarl. "How dare you," she spat, her voice venomous. "After I sacrificed everything for you, I raised you, I cared for you, and this is the thanks I get? To be humiliated in front of all our friends by this cold-hearted snake you married." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She has bewitched you, turned you against your own mother." The spell was broken. Her audience, her loyal court, was shifting uncomfortably. They had come for a party, not a public execution. Some of her friends started whispering to each other. Others suddenly found the floor fascinating. They had seen the victim act for months, but seeing this raw, unhinged rage was something else entirely. They were seeing what I saw every single day. Brenda sensed she was losing the room. The fury evaporated as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the familiar, desperate performance of the martyr. Her shoulders slumped. A single perfect tear traced a path through her foundation. Her voice broke into a pathetic sob. I can't believe this. My own son." She clutched her chest, her breathing suddenly becoming ragged and shallow. "My heart. Oh, my heart." Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her body went limp, and she started to crumple toward the floor. Mark lunged forward to catch her, but he wasn't fast enough. She hit the hardwood with a sickening thud, her champagne flute shattering beside her. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed. Her friend Carol rushed forward, yelling, "She has a heart condition! Somebody call 911!" The next 10 minutes were a blur of panicked voices and flashing lights. While Mark and Carol fussed over Brenda's prone form on the floor, I stood rooted to the spot, a cold, detached observer. My heart was pounding, but not with fear or concern. It was pounding with a chilling certainty. A heart condition? This was the first I'd ever heard of it. In 6 months of living under my roof, Brenda had complained about everything from phantom gluten allergies to the tragic thinning of her hair, but never once had a heart condition been mentioned. It was another performance, a desperate last-ditch effort to seize control of the narrative, her grand finale. Mark was frantically on the phone with the 911 operator, his voice tight with panic. "Yes, my mother. She collapsed. I think it might be a heart attack." People were scurrying out of the house, their New Year's cheer evaporating into awkward goodbyes and worried glances back at the scene. They didn't want to be witnesses to this family implosion. The party was officially over. The paramedics arrived with stunning speed, their heavy boots thudding on the hardwood floors I'd polished just that morning. They were professional and efficient, a whirlwind of blue uniforms and medical equipment that descended upon the living room. They hooked Brenda up to monitors, her eyes still closed, a faint, pained moan escaping her lips every so often. I watched them work, my arms crossed over my chest. The eviction notice lay on the floor near the shattered glass, a forgotten casualty in the unfolding drama. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind, tired eyes, looked up at me. "Are you family?" "I'm her daughter-in-law," I said, my voice flat. "Do you know if she has any pre-existing conditions? High blood pressure? Angina?" "Not that she's ever mentioned to me," I said truthfully. Carol, who was hovering nearby, shot me a venomous look. "She keeps it private. She doesn't like to be a burden," Carol hissed, loud enough for the paramedic to hear. "Her doctor's name is Dr. Albright. She's been seeing him for years about her arrhythmia." The paramedic nodded, making a note. Mark finished his call and rushed back to the scene. "They're taking her to St. Mary's," he said to me, his face ashen. "I'm going with her. You should clean up here." The command, the casual assumption that I would be left to clean up the wreckage of her latest explosion, stung more than he could ever know. But I just nodded. Arguing now was pointless. They loaded Brenda onto a gurney. Just before they wheeled her out, her eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze found mine across the room. There was no pain, no confusion. There was only pure, triumphant malice. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on her lips before her eyes rolled shut again. She knew. She knew she had won this round. She had turned my moment of victory into a public spectacle of her victimhood, and she'd done it flawlessly. After the ambulance pulled away, its sirens wailing into the first few minutes of the new year, an oppressive silence fell over the house. Only Carol remained, glaring at me from the doorway. "I hope you're happy, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with poison. "You could have killed her." Then she turned and left, slamming the door behind her. I was alone. The house was a disaster zone of half-eaten food, spilled drinks, and deflating balloons. In the center of it all was a small puddle of champagne and the glittering shards of a broken flute. I slowly walked over and picked up the eviction notice. The corner was damp and slightly smudged, but the words were still clear. 30 days. The clock was ticking. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning. I worked with a methodical fury, scrubbing away every last trace of Brenda and her party. It felt symbolic, like I was reclaiming my territory, sanitizing my home of her toxic presence. Around 3 a.m., my phone rang. It was Mark. "She's stable," he said, his voice thick with exhaustion. "They're keeping her overnight for observation. They said her EKG was a little irregular, but no signs of a heart attack. They think it was a syncopal episode, probably brought on by stress." A fainting spell. I almost laughed. "Stress," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Yes, I imagine being held accountable for your actions is incredibly stressful." "Sarah, please," he begged. "Not now. Can we just get through tonight?" "Is she awake?" I asked, ignoring his plea. "Yeah, she's awake. The doctor just left." "Put her on the phone," I said. There was a pause. "What? Why?" "Sarah, she needs to rest." Mark, put your mother on the phone right now, or I swear to you, I will get in my car, drive to that hospital, and say what I have to say in front of the entire nursing staff. Your choice." I heard a muffled exchange. Then Brenda's weak, reedy voice came on the line. "Sarah, what do you want?" I took a deep breath. "Just wanted to let you know, Brenda, that the show was very convincing, a masterful performance. But the clock is still ticking. Heart palpitations or not, you have 29 days left. And I've already called a locksmith. The locks will be changed tomorrow morning. Mark can bring you your things, but you are not stepping foot in this house again." A sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a sound that wasn't a sob or a gasp, but something uglier. It was the sound of pure, undiluted rage. "You will regret this," she hissed, the frail patient act gone completely. "You have no idea what you've just done." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Her threat hadn't sounded like the empty words of a cornered woman. It sounded like a promise. I looked around my spotless, silent house. I had won the battle, but her final words made me feel, for the first time, that I had just started a war I had no idea how to win. The next few days were a tense and surreal ceasefire. True to my word, the locksmith came on New Year's Day. The smooth, metallic click of the new bolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. Mark came home late that afternoon, looking like a man who had been through a war. His shoulders were slumped, and his face was etched with a deep, weary sadness. He didn't argue about the locks. He just nodded, dropped his keys on the counter, and accepted the new one I held out for him. He told me Brenda had been discharged. Her friend Carol had picked her up and taken her to her own house until she could figure things out. The hospital had officially diagnosed her with vasovagal syncope, a fancy term for fainting due to an emotional trigger. The irregular EKG was chalked up to a benign arrhythmia she'd apparently had for years but never bothered to mention. The entire event had been, just as I suspected, a manufactured medical drama. "She refuses to speak to me," Mark said, staring into a mug of coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. "Carol is acting as her gatekeeper. She calls me every few hours to tell me what a monster you are and how Brenda is too fragile to even hear your name." "Good," I said, perhaps a little too coldly. "The less we hear from either of them, the better." Mark flinched. "Sarah, she's still my mother." "And I'm still your wife," I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. "She pawned my grandmother's necklace, Mark. She faked a heart attack to humiliate me in my own home. At what point does 'she's my mother' stop being a valid excuse for her behavior?" He had no answer for that. We existed in a state of fragile peace, tiptoeing around the crater Brenda had left in our marriage. We went to work. We ate dinner in near silence. We went to bed with a canyon of unspoken resentment between us. He was caught between his duty as a son and his loyalty as a husband, and the conflict was tearing him apart. I, on the other hand, felt a lightness I hadn't realized was missing. For the first time in 6 months, I could walk into my own kitchen without bracing for a passive-aggressive comment. I could leave my laptop on the table without worrying it would be tidied up into oblivion. The house was quiet. It was mine again. A week later, the first shot in Brenda's new war was fired. I received a certified letter in the mail. My hands were trembling slightly as I signed for it. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a cease and desist letter, thick with legal jargon. It accused me of harassment, elder abuse, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. It demanded I retract the eviction, issue a formal apology, and allow Brenda to return to the home to continue her convalescence. It was utterly baseless, a work of pure fiction. But seeing it all laid out in terrifyingly official language made my blood run cold. It was signed by a lawyer named Arthur Vance. I called Mark at work, my voice shaking with rage. "She's suing us. She got a lawyer." He was silent for a long moment. I "I got a call from an uncle I haven't spoken to in 15 years," he said, his voice strained. "My cousin called my sister. Brenda is systematically calling every relative we have, telling them you physically assaulted her and threw her out into the cold on New Year's Eve. She's painting a picture of you as a violent, abusive monster." The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was a scorched earth campaign designed to destroy my reputation, to isolate us, to turn our own family against us. Brenda wasn't just trying to get her room back, she was trying to burn my entire life to the ground. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my laptop, fueled by fury and coffee, and I started digging. I looked up Arthur Vance. He wasn't some high-powered attorney. He was a small-time lawyer specializing in personal injury and landlord-tenant disputes. His website was littered with testimonials from wrongfully evicted tenants. My stomach clenched. Brenda had found the perfect legal mercenary. Then, on a hunch, I started digging into Brenda's finances. I knew the name of the bank where she'd opened the secret credit card. It was a long shot, but after hours of searching through public records databases, I found something. It wasn't about the credit card. It was a lien. A massive 5-year-old tax lien from the IRS against her and my late father-in-law for over $100,000. My mind raced. When my father-in-law had died, Brenda had inherited everything. The house, the savings, the investments. She had always portrayed herself as a comfortable, if not wealthy, widow. But a lien that large, that meant they had been in serious financial trouble for years. I kept digging, pulling property records. She had told us she'd sold her old house for a tidy profit. The records showed she'd sold it, yes, but it was a short sale, for far less than it was worth, barely enough to cover the mortgage. There was no profit. There was nothing. The entire story she had spun for us, the big, empty house being too much for her, was a lie. She hadn't moved in with us for emotional support. She had moved in because she was completely broke. The designer clothes, the spa days, the expensive groceries. She was using Mark's generosity and my money to maintain the illusion of the life she'd lost. My grandmother's necklace hadn't just been for a handbag. It had been a desperate infusion of cash for a woman drowning in debt. I felt a dizzying wave of clarity. This wasn't just a toxic mother-in-law. This was a con artist, a desperate, skilled manipulator who had been playing us from the very beginning. The legal threats, the smear campaign, it was all the desperate flailing of a cornered animal, terrified of having her secrets exposed. The next morning, I called Arthur Vance. His secretary put me on hold, but I was relentless. Finally, he picked up, his voice smooth and condescending. "Miss Evans, to what do I owe the pleasure? Have you reconsidered my client's very reasonable requests?" "I'm not calling to reconsider," I said, my voice like ice. "I'm calling to inform you that you are representing a client who is engaged in a pattern of financial fraud against my husband and me. And I'm also looking at a federal tax lien against her for a rather significant amount of money. I can't help but wonder if the IRS would be interested to know about the undisclosed income she's been enjoying while living in my home, not to mention the recent sale of stolen property." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. The smooth, confident mask dropped. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing. He was blindsided. He had taken the case of a poor, abused old woman, and I had just handed him a ticking time bomb of tax fraud and theft. "I think," I said, pressing my advantage, "that you and I both know this cease and desist letter is garbage. So here's what's going to happen. You are going to drop this case. Your client will cease all contact and defamatory statements, and in 22 days, if her belongings are not out of my guest room, I will have them put in storage at her expense. Am I making myself clear?" He cleared his throat, his voice now strained and uncertain. I will have to confer with my client." "You do that," I said, and hung up. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had her. The truth was my weapon, and I had just fired a shot right at the heart of her deception. For the next 2 days, there was silence. No calls from Carol, no angry emails from distant cousins. It was an eerie, unsettling quiet. On the 3rd day, a plain brown box arrived on our doorstep. There was no return address. I took it inside and opened it on the kitchen counter. It was a shoebox. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was my grandmother's sapphire necklace. There was no note, no apology, just the necklace, returned as silently as it was taken. But underneath it, tucked into the corner of the box, was a small folded piece of paper. It wasn't a note. It was a photograph, a faded Polaroid from years ago. It was a picture of Mark, looking no older than 10, standing on a beach with a woman I didn't recognize. And on the back, in Brenda's spidery handwriting, were 2 words: "Ask him." I stared at the photograph, the glossy square of paper feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. The boy was unmistakably Mark, the same wide-set eyes, the same goofy grin, a gap where a front tooth should be. The woman beside him was young and beautiful, with long, dark hair whipping in the sea breeze. She had her arm around his small shoulders, and they were both laughing, caught in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. It wasn't Brenda. The casual intimacy of the photo, the way Mark was leaning into her, spoke of a deep and familiar bond. Ask him. The words were a poisoned dart, aimed not at me this time, but at the very foundation of my marriage. When Mark came home that evening, I didn't say anything at first. I let him get a drink, unwind from his day. I watched him, this man I thought I knew better than myself, and felt a chasm opening between us. Brenda hadn't just returned the necklace, she'd planted a landmine. She knew I would find the lien. She knew I would corner her. This was her contingency plan, her nuclear option. She couldn't win the war for the house, so she was going to try to win the war for her son by destroying his relationship with me. Finally, I couldn't bear the silence any longer. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up the photograph, and placed it in front of him. "I got a package today," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. This was inside. Mark's eyes fell on the photo, and his reaction was immediate and visceral. All the color drained from his face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He reached out a trembling hand and picked it up, his thumb tracing the woman's smiling face. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It came with the necklace. Your mother sent it. The back says, 'Ask him.'" My eyes were locked on his, searching, demanding. "So I'm asking you, Mark, who is she?" He sank into a kitchen chair, the photo still clutched in his hand. He stared at it for a long, agonizing minute before he finally looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Her name was Elena," he said, his voice barely audible. "She was my mother, my real mother." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "What are you talking about? Brenda is your mother." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Brenda is my stepmother, Elena. She died when I was 10. It was a car accident. My dad was devastated. He met Brenda about a year later. She was a widow, too, or so she said. They got married very quickly. From the moment she moved in, it was like Elena ceased to exist. Brenda packed up all her pictures, all her clothes. She told me it was too painful for Dad to see them. She told me I should call her Mom to help him heal. I was a kid. I was grieving. I did what I was told." The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture more monstrous than I could have imagined. Brenda hadn't just married Mark's father. She had systematically erased his first wife. She hadn't just become a stepmother. She'd stolen a dead woman's life, her home, her son. "She always hated any mention of Elena," Mark continued, his voice thick with a lifetime of repressed grief. "If I ever brought her up, Brenda would have a meltdown, accuse me of not loving her, of trying to hurt her. My dad, he just went along with it. He couldn't handle the pain, so he let Brenda build this new reality around them. Over the years, it just became the truth. Brenda was Mom. It was easier than fighting. Her jealousy, her possessiveness, her pathological need to be the center of Mark's world, it all made a horrifying kind of sense now. I wasn't just a daughter-in-law threatening her control. I was the latest in a long line of threats to the false identity she had so carefully constructed. Elena was the ghost she'd been fighting for 30 years, and I was the living embodiment of a woman who had Mark's love, something she'd only ever been able to demand, never truly earn. The pawn necklace wasn't just about money, it was about erasing another piece of a woman's legacy that had been passed down to me. I knelt in front of Mark, my anger at Brenda momentarily eclipsed by a wave of sorrow for the little boy in the photograph. I took his hand. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Shame, I guess," he admitted, his voice cracking. It felt like a betrayal to Elena's memory to let her be forgotten, and a betrayal to my dad to bring it all up again. Brenda made it so toxic, so I just buried it. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said, my voice firm. "She did this to you. She did this to us." That photograph was meant to be a wedge, to make me see Mark as a liar who had hidden a fundamental part of himself from me. But Brenda, in her infinite malice, had miscalculated. She didn't understand that our marriage was built on something stronger than her lies. Seeing Mark's pain, understanding the lifetime of manipulation he had endured, didn't push me away. It brought me closer. It solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about a guest room anymore. This was about liberating my husband from a 30-year emotional prison. The next day, Mark and I went to Carol's house. Not to fight, not to argue. We went together. When Carol opened the door, her face set in a familiar scowl, she was shocked to see Mark standing beside me, his hand holding mine. "Brenda!" Mark called out, his voice clear and strong, leaving no room for argument. "We need to talk." Brenda appeared behind Carol, looking pale and withered. The fight seemed to have gone out of her. She saw us standing together, a united front, and her shoulders slumped in defeat. We didn't go inside. We stood on the porch, the crisp winter air a welcome antidote to the years of toxic secrets. "It's over, Brenda," Mark said, his voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound and weary finality. "The lies are over. I know who you are. I know what you did. And I know who Elena was. She was my mother." At the mention of her name, a flicker of the old rage sparked in Brenda's eyes, but it died just as quickly. There was nowhere left for her to run. The lie she had built her entire life on had crumbled. "You have 17 days, I said, my voice calm and even. "After that, your belongings will be in a storage unit in your name. The key will be here with Carol. This is the last time you will ever see or speak to either one of us." She opened her mouth, perhaps to launch into one last desperate performance. But Mark cut her off. "Goodbye, Brenda." And with that, we turned and walked away. We didn't look back. We walked back to our car, got in and drove away, leaving 30 years of lies and manipulation on that doorstep. In the rearview mirror, I saw the front door close, and I knew with absolute certainty that we were finally free. The house we returned to wasn't just clean, it felt cleansed. That night, Mark brought out a small, dusty box from the back of his closet. It was filled with pictures of Elena. We spent hours looking through them as he told me stories of the mother he barely got to know. We were not just evicting a toxic mother-in-law, we were welcoming a memory back home. The new year had started in chaos, but it was now truly a new beginning for both of us.